Early morning, February 1895. Indian Territory, what you know today as eastern Oklahoma. A black rider gallops alone through absolute darkness. His name is Bass Reeves, and in his pocket he carries an arrest warrant that could change the history of the Wild West forever. 100 miles away, hidden in a rotting wooden cabin, the most wanted man in the territory is cleaning his revolver. Crawford Goldsby, better known as Cherokee Bill, a killer barely 19 years old who has already murdered more men than he can count on both hands. But Cherokee Bill has just made the biggest mistake of his short and violent life. He threatened the daughter of Judge Isaac Parker, the hanging judge, the man who has sent more than 80 criminals to death by hanging. And when that threat reached the judge's ears, he only had to speak one name: Bass Reeves. What happened in the next 72 hours has been systematically erased from history books for over a century, because the truth of what happened contradicts everything Hollywood has taught you about the Wild West. The greatest manhunter of the American frontier was not white. He was black, and he was about to prove why the outlaws of Indian Territory trembled when they heard his name. You need to understand something first. Indian Territory in the 1890s was not simply dangerous. It was the deadliest place in all of the United States. A territory of more than 46,000 square miles with practically no law. Imagine an area the size of an entire country where murderers, bank robbers, whiskey smugglers, and fugitives from across the continent could hide without anyone pursuing them. That was Indian Territory. The only arm of the law that had jurisdiction over this hell was the federal court in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and the man who presided over it was Judge Isaac Charles Parker. They called him the hanging judge, and the nickname was not an exaggeration. In his 21 years on the bench, Parker sent 86 men to their deaths. But here is what the history books do not tell you. Parker was not a bloodthirsty judge. He was a desperate man trying to bring order to a territory where murders occurred daily, where outlaws attacked stagecoaches, raped, killed, and disappeared into the vastness of the territory without anyone being able to stop them. Parker needed exceptional men to hunt these criminals, and he found the most exceptional of all in the most unlikely man. Bass Reeves was born a slave in Crawford County, Arkansas, in 1838. Think about that. He was born as the property of another human being. His first owner was a colonel named William Reeves. From childhood, Bass was forced to work in the fields and later as a personal servant. But even in captivity, he demonstrated skills that no one could ignore. He was an exceptional marksman. He could track animals across terrain where other men saw nothing but dirt and grass. And he had an imposing physique. He stood more than 6 feet 2 inches tall. He was extraordinarily strong. When the Civil War broke out, Bass saw his opportunity. He escaped into Indian Territory, where native nations gave him refuge. He lived among the Cherokee, the Creek, and the Seminole for years. He learned their languages. He learned their customs. He learned every trail, every creek, every cave of that territory he would one day hunt. When the war ended and slavery was abolished, Bass Reeves was free, but he was also something more. He was probably the man who knew Indian Territory better than anyone else in the entire United States. In 1875, Judge Isaac Parker appointed 200 deputy marshals to patrol Indian Territory. Among them was Bass Reeves, one of the first black law officers west of the Mississippi River, and from day one, he proved to be different from all the others. In an era when most marshals died in their first year of service, Bass Reeves simply could not be stopped. He developed techniques that no other officer used. He disguised himself as a drifter, as a preacher, as a traveling salesman, as a farmer. He infiltrated outlaw hideouts by posing as a fugitive himself. And when he revealed his true identity, it was already too late. The criminals were staring down the barrel of his Colt .45 caliber revolver. Do you know how many arrests Bass Reeves made in his career? more than 3,000. And here comes the incredible part. In more than 3 decades as a marshal, pursuing the most dangerous men on the continent, Bass Reeves never received a single gunshot wound. 14 outlaws died trying to kill him. He killed 14 men in self-defense or in the line of duty, but none managed to wound him. It was as if bullets simply could not touch him. Cherokee Bill was the opposite of Bass Reeves in almost every way. Crawford Goldsby was born in Fort Concho, Texas, in 1876. His father was a black soldier named George Goldsby. His mother, Ellen Beck, had Cherokee, Mexican, black, and white ancestry. From childhood, Cherokee Bill showed signs of what was to come. He was impulsive, violent, unable to control his temper. By age 12, he had already had multiple violent confrontations. At 18, he committed his first murder. And once he tasted blood, he could not stop. He joined Bill Cook's gang, one of the most violent outlaw groups in Indian Territory. And he quickly became the most feared member of the gang, not because he was the leader, but because he was the most unpredictable. Cherokee Bill did not kill only when it was necessary for a robbery. He killed when he felt insulted. He killed when someone looked at him in a way he did not like. He killed because he could. In less than 2 years, he accumulated at least 7 confirmed murders. Probably many more that were never documented. His most notorious crime occurred in Lenape, Indian Territory. In November 1894, Cherokee Bill and the Cook gang attempted to rob a merchant's store owned by a man named Schufelt. During the robbery, a man named Ernest Melton simply stuck his head out the window to see what was happening. Cherokee Bill shot him in the head without a word. Melton was an innocent man. He posed no threat. He simply had the bad luck of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. That murder changed everything, because Ernest Melton was known and loved in the community. His death provoked public outrage, and that outrage reached directly to Judge Isaac Parker's desk. Parker had dealt with murderers before. He had sent dozens to the gallows. But there was something about Cherokee Bill that deeply disturbed him: the outlaw's youth, his absolute lack of remorse, the almost casual way he took human lives. Parker issued an arrest warrant with a reward of $1,300, an astronomical sum for the time. Cherokee Bill became the most wanted man in Indian Territory. But Cherokee Bill was not going to be captured easily. He knew the territory almost as well as Bass Reeves. He had allies in dozens of communities. And most importantly, he was not afraid to die. That made him incredibly dangerous. A man who does not fear death is a man who cannot be intimidated. And Cherokee Bill knew that if they captured him, Judge Parker would send him to the gallows. So he decided to do something that no outlaw had attempted before. He decided to attack the judge where it would hurt the most: his family. The exact details of how Cherokee Bill threatened Judge Parker's daughter vary according to sources. Some accounts speak of messages sent through intermediaries. Others mention that the outlaw was seen lurking near Parker's residence in Fort Smith. What is documented is that the threat was serious enough for Parker to act immediately and unprecedentedly. The judge did not wait for the threat to materialize. He did not trust ordinary marshals. He did something he rarely did. He personally summoned Bass Reeves. The meeting between Parker and Reeves took place in the judge's office. Imagine the scene: the most feared magistrate of the Wild West seated behind his oak desk, his eyes tired from seeing so much horror, and standing before him, the largest and most feared man in Indian Territory, Bass Reeves. Parker was not a man of many words. He was direct. Cherokee Bill had threatened his daughter. He wanted the outlaw alive if possible, dead if necessary, but he wanted him before his court. Bass Reeves simply nodded. He asked no questions. He requested no more information. He had hunted hundreds of men more difficult than Cherokee Bill. This would be just one more. That night, Before the sun rose, Bass Reeves was already riding toward Indian Territory. He carried with him his Winchester Model 1873, his Colt revolver, his handcuffs, and his reputation. The last was probably the most powerful weapon of all. Subscribe if you are enjoying this video. The hunt that followed would become one of the most intense in Wild West history. Bass Reeves knew Indian Territory like the back of his hand, but Cherokee Bill knew it too. And he had a network of informants and allies who warned him every time a marshal approached. It was like a deadly chess game played across more than 40,000 square miles of wild territory. Reeves began as he always began, gathering information, speaking with his own contacts in the native nations, visiting saloons and trading posts where outlaws bought supplies, and using his legendary disguises. There are accounts that during this hunt, Reeves disguised himself as an elderly drifter, walking hunched over with a cane, begging for food in the very camps where Cherokee Bill had been hours before. Other accounts describe him posing as an itinerant preacher, carrying a Bible in one hand, while his other hand remained discreetly close to his hidden revolver. Cherokee Bill, meanwhile, was not fleeing passively. He was playing his own game. He knew Reeves was after him, and he knew the marshal's reputation, so he attempted a risky strategy. He tried to ambush the hunter. According to testimonies of the time, Cherokee Bill and two of his associates set up an ambush in a narrow pass near the Canadian River. They waited for hours, but Reeves never appeared where they expected, because Reeves had anticipated exactly that move. Instead of taking the obvious route, he had circled around the position from the north, adding almost an entire day to his journey, but avoiding the deadly trap. When Cherokee Bill realized his ambush had failed, he knew he was facing someone different from any other marshal he had evaded before, someone who thought exactly like him. The pursuit continued for days. Bass Reeves slept few hours, always with one eye open. He changed horses regularly to maintain his pace, and he kept getting closer. The clues were getting fresher. Witnesses reported having seen Cherokee Bill just hours before. The noose was tightening. Cherokee Bill began to make mistakes. At first was trusting too many people. In a territory where the bounty on his head was $1,300, every person who saw him was a potential informant. And Reeves was an expert at convincing people to cooperate, not with threats, with respect, with the promise that doing so was the right thing. One by one, Cherokee Bill's allies began to disappear. Some were arrested by other marshals. Others simply decided it was not worth dying to protect a murderer. And others, the most pragmatic, saw in Bass Reeves an opportunity. This is where Ike Rogers comes in. Rogers was Cherokee Bill's cousin on his mother's side. He had been a friend and ally of the outlaw for years, but he was also a practical man. And when Bass Reeves showed up at his door, Rogers saw exactly which way the wind was blowing. The conversation between Reeves and Rogers was never documented in detail, but the result was, Rogers agreed to help capture his own cousin, in exchange for a portion of the reward and the promise that he would not be prosecuted for his own illegal activities. Some historians criticize this tactic. They say Reeves should have captured Cherokee Bill alone in a direct confrontation. But that demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of how Bass Reeves worked. He was not seeking glory. He was seeking results. His job was to capture criminals and bring them to justice. It was not to prove his manhood in unnecessary shootouts. If he could arrest a murderer without firing a single shot, that was a victory, not cowardice. The plan was simple but effective. Rogers would invite Cherokee Bill to his house. He would offer him food and shelter, and when the outlaw let his guard down, Rogers would disarm him. Bass Reeves would be waiting outside, ready to intervene if something went wrong. On the night of January 30th, 1895, Cherokee Bill arrived at Ike Rogers' house. He was exhausted. He had been running for days. The constant pressure from Bass Reeves had left him paranoid and worn out. When his cousin offered him a safe place to rest, Cherokee Bill accepted with relief. It was his last mistake. During dinner, Rogers got up from the table with the excuse of getting more firewood. When he returned, he did so with an iron poker in his hand. The blow took Cherokee Bill completely by surprise. It knocked him off his chair. Before he could reach his revolver, Rogers was already on top of him. And then the door burst open. Bass Reeves entered with his Winchester, pointing directly at the outlaw's head. The exact words he spoke vary, depending on who tells the story. But the message was clear. Cherokee Bill had been captured. Can you imagine that moment? The most wanted killer in Indian Territory, the man who had sworn he would never be taken alive, lying on his own cousin's kitchen floor. And standing over him, the legendary black marshal who had ridden through darkness to bring justice. Cherokee Bill was handcuffed and chained. Bass Reeves personally secured the shackles. And then began the long journey back to Fort Smith, a journey of more than 100 miles with one of the most dangerous men in the West as his prisoner. During the trip, according to witness accounts, Cherokee Bill tried several times to escape. He offered bribes. He threatened. He begged. But Reeves was immune to all of it. He had heard the same promises and threats from hundreds of outlaws before. None had escaped his custody. Cherokee Bill would not be the first. The arrival in Fort Smith was a spectacle. Hundreds of people gathered to see the famous killer escorted to the courthouse. Cherokee Bill, chained hand and foot, was forced to walk through the streets while the crowd booed him. And behind him, mounted on his horse, came Bass Reeves, the man who had done what seemed impossible, who had tracked the most elusive killer in the territory, who had protected Judge Parker's family simply by doing his job better than anyone in the world. Cherokee Bill's trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. Multiple witnesses identified him as Ernest Nelton's murderer, and that was just one of his many crimes. Judge Parker showed no mercy. Cherokee Bill was sentenced to death by hanging. But the story did not end there. While awaiting his execution in the Fort Smith jail, Cherokee Bill demonstrated once again why he was so dangerous. Somehow he obtained a revolver. Theories about how he got it vary. Some say it was a corrupt guard. Others suggest a visitor hid it for him. Whatever the case, on July 31st, 1895, Cherokee Bill used that revolver to kill Lawrence Keating, a prison guard who tried to stop his escape. The escape attempt failed. Cherokee Bill was subdued again. But now he had another murder on his record. Another trial. Another death sentence. This time there would be no more delays. On March 17th, 1896, Crawford Goldsby, Cherokee Bill, was led to the gallows in Fort Smith. He was barely 20 years old. He had killed at least 8 men that we know of. Probably more. When asked if he had any last words, his response became legend. He simply said he had not come to make a speech. He had come to be hanged. Seconds later, the trapdoor opened, and Cherokee Bill ceased to exist. But there is something the history books forget to mention. When Cherokee Bill's body fell through the trapdoor, Bass Reeves was present, not as a spectator, as a law officer fulfilling his duty to the end. The same man who had hunted him, the same man who had captured him, the same man who had protected the judge's family. He was there to see that justice was served. And here is where I need you to pay attention, because this is what Hollywood has never shown you. Bass Reeves continued serving as a marshal for 15 more years after Cherokee Bill's capture. He kept arresting criminals until 1907, when Oklahoma became a state and Indian Territory ceased to exist legally. By then he was almost 70 years old, and he was still as effective as ever. Throughout his entire career, Bass Reeves arrested more than 3,000 fugitives. He killed 14 men in the line of duty. He was never wounded by a bullet. He never lost a prisoner in his custody. And he did all of this being a black man in an era when most of the United States considered him inferior because of his skin color. Think about what that means. Every time Bass Reeves walked into a saloon full of white outlaws, he knew many of them hated him simply for existing. Every time he arrested a white criminal, he had to deal with the humiliation of being considered less than human by the person he was handcuffing. Every time he entered a courtroom, he faced judges and lawyers who probably despised him privately. And still, he did his job, day after day, year after year, decade after decade. Bass Reeves died on January 12, 1910 in Muskogee, Oklahoma. He was 71 years old. The official cause of death was Bright's disease, a kidney condition. But some say he had simply worn out, that decades of riding through wild territories, sleeping outdoors, facing deadly dangers almost daily, had finally taken their toll. His funeral was modest. He was buried in the Union Agency Cemetery in Muskogee, and for almost a century, that was all. His name disappeared from history books. Western movies ignored him. Stories of the Wild West taught in schools did not mention him. It was as if Bass Reeves, the most effective marshal in American history, had never existed. Why did this happen? The answer is uncomfortable, but necessary. Bass Reeves was erased from history because he was black. In the era of Jim Crow laws, when segregation was legal and racism was openly promoted by institutions, the idea of a black hero was unacceptable to the dominant narrative. Hollywood needed white cowboys. Textbooks needed white heroes. The legend of the Wild West had to be a white legend. So Bass Reeves was deliberately forgotten. His exploits were attributed to others, or simply ignored. It took decades before dedicated historians began to unearth the truth, to reconstruct the story of the black marshal who had made more arrests than any other law officer on the American frontier. Today, we know the truth. We know that Bass Reeves was the likely inspiration for the Lone Ranger character, a law officer who used disguises, who had a Native American contact who helped him, who always got his man. The similarities are too many to be coincidence. We know he was one of the most respected marshals by Judge Parker, who considered him indispensable for maintaining order in Indian Territory. We know that even in an era of extreme racism, white outlaws feared his name more than any other officers, because in the end, when you are staring down the barrel of a revolver, the skin color of the man holding it does not matter as much as his skill in using it. Next time you watch a Wild West movie, I want you to ask yourself a question. Where is Bass Reeves? Why does the most effective marshal in history not have dozens of movies about him? Why are John Wayne and Clint Eastwood names that everyone recognizes, while Bass Reeves remains relatively unknown? The answer tells you everything you need to know about how history is written, and about who decides which stories deserve to be told. But the truth has a way of surfacing eventually, and the truth about Bass Reeves is too powerful to remain buried forever. Cherokee Bill threatened Judge Isaac Parker's daughter, and by the following dawn, Bass Reeves was already hunting him. That is the power of a man who knows his purpose, who is not intimidated by his prey's reputation, who does his job regardless of the obstacles. Cherokee Bill was a ruthless killer who terrorized all of Indian Territory. But when Bass Reeves crossed his path, the hunter became the hunted. The terrifying became the terrified. The invincible was defeated. That is what happens when you cross the hanging judge. He sends you the man who never fails, the relentless hunter, the marshal who arrested more criminals than any other in Wild West history, the black man who proved that justice has no color. And that is the lesson you need to remember, because this story is not just about the Wild West. It is not just about outlaws and marshals. It is about what happens when history is written by the winners, about how heroes can be erased simply because their existence contradicts the narrative someone wants to tell. Bass Reeves existed. He did extraordinary things. He captured thousands of criminals. He protected entire communities. He proved that a black man could be the best in his field in an era that denied him even his basic humanity. And for a century, They tried to make us forget. But here we are, telling his story, speaking his name, remembering what he did. Cherokee Bill is buried somewhere in Oklahoma. His grave is occasionally visited by morbid curiosity seekers interested in famous outlaws. But Bass Reeves' legacy is alive. It grows every year as more people discover the truth. It strengthens every time someone tells this story. February 1895. A black rider gallops alone through the night in Indian Territory. In his pocket, he carries an arrest warrant. At his waist, a revolver he has fired thousands of times. In his heart, the unbreakable determination of a man who knows exactly who he is and what he must do. Cherokee Bill can run. He can hide. He can threaten and kill. But in the end, none of that matters, because Bass Reeves is already coming. And Bass Reeves always gets his man. That is the story they never told you. That is the truth they tried to bury. That is the hero you deserve to know. Subscribe if you enjoyed this video.